Hello everyone. In this lesson, we are going to walk through the entire traffic pattern step by step, starting from takeoff all the way to landing. We'll talk about what you should be doing during each leg of the pattern, what visual references you can use, and some common mistakes student pilots often make. Understanding the traffic pattern well is one of the most important skills for learning how to land consistently. So, alright, let's get started. The traffic pattern helps organize how aircraft to operate around the airport. Instead of airplanes approaching the runway from different directions, everyone follows the same general flow. So this makes aircraft movements more predictable and helps reduce the risk of conflicts between airplanes, especially at non-tower airports. For student pilots, the traffic pattern is also where most landing practice happens. By flying the pattern repeatedly, you should start developing a consistent approach, controlling your speed, maintaining proper spacing, and staying aligned with the runway. Over time, this repetition helps make your approaches and landings much more stable and consistent. Okay, cool. Okay. Uh, During training and also during your check ride, the examiner is not just evaluating the landing itself. They are really observing how well you manage the entire traffic pattern. So, for example, you're expected to maintain altitude within about plus minus 100 feet and airspeed within about plus minus 10 knots of your target airspeed. Mm, and the examiner will also be watching how well you maintain proper runway alignments, especially on final approach, and whether you keep reasonable and consistent spacing from the runway throughout the pattern. Another important thing is situational awareness. So you should always be aware of where you are in the pattern and where other aircraft might be operating. The examiner is also paying attention to safety during the base to final turn. For example, you should avoid making an overly aggressive or uncoordinated turn that could lead to a stall spin situation, especially at low altitude. Additionally, if the airport has parallel runways, you must be careful not to overshoot the final approach and drift into the path of another runway. All of these situations are related to safety and proper pattern management, so they are important things to keep in mind. So, overall, the goal is not just making the landing, it's demonstrating that you can safely manage the entire pattern from takeoff to touchdown. I mean, landing. Alright, does it make sense? Great. Yes, this one is the overview of the track pattern. The track pattern follows a predictable sequence. After takeoff, the airplane flies the upwind leg and then turns crosswind, continues to downwind, where the landing setup begins, and then transitions through base and final before landing. Each leg of the pattern has a specific purpose, and understanding the overall flow makes the pattern much easier to manage. It's also a good habit to start thinking ahead about how you want to fly the pattern based on the wind conditions. For example, depending on the wind direction and strength, you might need to adjust how much crab correction you apply, or decide whether it would be better to start your turns a little earlier or later than usual. And thinking about these things ahead of time helps you stay ahead of the airplane and manage the pattern more smoothly. Okay? Cool. Cool. So before beginning the takeoff roll, make sure the airplane is properly aligned with the runway center line. Yeah. And also verify that your heading indicator matches the runway heading. Once everything looks correct, smoothly apply full power and then as the power increases, confirm your power indications like RPM, and ensure that all engine instruments are in the green arc or green. During the takeoff roll, maintain the runway centerline using coordinate rotor inputs. When the airspeed reaches 55 knots, gradually pitch up to establish the VY climb attitude. Avoid raising the nose abruptly. The pitch change should be smooth and controlled, okay? Then after the airplane lifts off, shift your attention outside and establish your number one outside reference. The goal is to maintain the same outside picture so that your ground track continues to follow the runway extended center line, even after leaving the runway, okay? And if there's a crosswind, you may need to apply a small crab correction here to maintain that ground track. As a secondary reference, you could check your GPS course and CDI if OBS is set to the runway magnetic heading. However, since this lesson focuses on private pilot training, the primary reference should always remain outside the visual cues, with instruments used only as confirmation, okay? Great. Crosswind. Okay. After takeoff, the airplane continues flying along the runway extended center line during the upwind leg. And then once the aircraft reaches approximately 700 feet AGL, we begin the turn to the crosswind. Before making the turn, it's important to visually check for traffic. So if this is a left trap pattern, lower your right wing slightly and scan the area for any aircraft. If the area is clear, make a call such as clear right, then begin a left turn to enter the crosswind leg. This procedure may vary slightly depending on the flight school, so it's always a good idea to follow the specific procedures taught by your instructor how to do this when you make a turn. Then during the crosswind leg, continue climbing at VY approximately 72 knots with full power. If there's a wind, you may notice that the airplane needs to turn slightly less than 90 degrees in order to maintain the correct ground track and remain within the track pattern, because the wind is coming from this way now, so your aircraft should fly like this for crabbing into the wind, okay? Cool. As a secondary reference, if it's G1000, well, that's kind of cheating, but well, you could also use the HSI and the magenta course diamond, which is this one, to the crosswind heading to help maintain the correct course. So, well, this magenta diamond is it's an indicator. So the symbol shows the aircraft's actual course, meaning the direction the airplane is actually moving over the ground. So if you set this to your crosswind heading, let's say this one is for the upwind, and if you set this magenta diamond like 90 degrees for the crosswind heading, then you can use it to confirm that the airplane is actually moving along that direction. Well, I told you before, however, as with most VFR training, the primary reference should always be outside visual cues, not the instruments. So just use it to confirm, okay? Cool. And let's get back to the crosswind phase again. And if the airplane reaches pattern altitude during the crosswind climbing, reduce power and adjust the pitch to establish a straight and level flight. Also, because it can sometimes be difficult to judge the spacing, the distance from the runway during the crosswind leg, many pilots simply count about 3 to 5 seconds before beginning the next turn to the downwind leg. But this is not an absolute rule. So, for example, if you reach pattern altitude earlier and the airplane accelerates faster, you may want to start the downwind turns a little sooner. The key idea is to always think about the situations dynamically and develop the habit of adjusting your pattern based on speed, altitude, and wind conditions rather than relying on a fixed rule every time. Does it make sense? Great. Cool. Downwind. Before discussing the downwind leg, let's briefly talk about leveling of pattern altitude. As the aircraft approaches the pattern altitude, begin the level of about 30 feet before reaching the altitude and transition into straight and level flight. Because, well, actually many student pilots tend to miss this. It's actually very common to see airplanes flying more than 100 feet above the pattern altitude. So make sure you pay attention to this. Cool. And once the airplane accelerates to around 80 and 85 knots and reduce the power to approximately 2300 RPM for pattern operation to make your airspeed to 90. The downwind leg is flown parallel to the runway in the opposite direction of landing. So, and it's important to maintain consistent spacing from the runway. And typically, we aim for about 3/4 mile spacing. One visual reference many pilots use is aligning the runway around the 2/3 point of the wing strut. I'm saying it's like here to the runway. Okay. And if there's wind, apply a crab correction to keep your ground track parallel to the runway. Okay, cool. And as you continue downwind, look for the touchdown point, meaning where you touch down. It's usually near the 1,000-foot markers this here, which is runway aiming point, marking on the runway, looking like a fridge, right? And then when your wingtip becomes a beam, the touchdown point. Yeah, when your wingtip becomes a beam, the touchdown point, begin the landing setup. Reduce power to about 1500 RPM. Yeah, this will beaming. Okay, so reduce power to about 1500 RPM. And while maintaining straight and level flight, once the airspeed drops below 110 knots, extend 10 degrees of flaps. And when extending the flaps, be careful not to let the airplane balloon upward. It's very easy to be airborne itself. So to prevent this, apply a slight forward pressure on the yoke momentarily to maintain straight and level flight while the flaps are extending. Then continue allowing the airplane to decelerate to about 77 knots. And then adjust the pitch to approximately 2x pitch. To speech attitude, which should stabilize the airplane at around 75 knots. Cool. At this point, it's very important to trim the airplane properly. If the power setting is correct and the airplane is properly trimmed, the aircraft will naturally maintain the desired airspeed. So from here, the approach can be managed mostly by small power adjustments and trim to land, which helps to keep the airplane stable all the way until landing. Continue flying until the runway threshold appears like 45. Behind your shoulder, which is the usual cue to begin the base turn. Okay, cool. All right, we're done. Okay, base turn. And the base turn usually, I said it begins when the runway threshold appears about 45 degrees behind your shoulder. Okay. And many pilots estimate this by slightly just leaning their head back and visually checking the angle behind them. When you're first learning this, it can be difficult to judge the timing accurately. So it's completely normal to ask your instructor to help identify the correct moment to start the turn. As a rough reference, this base turn often happens at around 600 feet AGL. And some airports may also have like a local visual cues, such as roads, ponds, or power plants that instructors use to identify the turning point. But if you're flying into a new airport, those local reference points can be difficult to recognize. So it's a good habit to turn your head, and visually check for that 45-degree angle. It's not difficult from the runway before beginning the base turn. Okay, cool. Well, so once you turn base, maintain the configuration that was established on downwind. For example, maintain approximately 1,500 feet AGL. 1,500 RPM with 2x pitch, and then extend the flaps 20 degrees and maintain about 70 knots using the pitch attitude outside with 70 knots. Okay, I mean, since we are extending more flaps here, the nose attitude will be slightly lower than normal 2x pitch. Cool. And if there's wind, apply appropriate correction to maintain the correct ground track. So you need to, if there's a strong wind coming from here this way, then you may turn more than 90 degrees. So not to be pushed away. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Great. Based final safety. If a pilot overshoots the final approach path, and tries to force the airplane back toward and runway using excessive rudder, the airplane can enter a skidding turn. Okay. At low airspeed and low altitude, this situation can quickly lead to stall spin accident, which is why it's very important to keep your turns gentle and coordinated in the track pattern. You should also be especially careful if the airport has parallel entry. Okay. So if you overshoot, the final approach in that situation, the airplane could drift toward the adjacent runway and potentially create a very dangerous conflict with other traffic. So please to be careful. Okay. And one way to prevent this, just to think ahead about the wind conditions while you're still on the downwind leg. For example, if the crosswind is blowing toward the runway, you may want to start your base turn earlier than usual to avoid overshooting the final. So on windy days, it's even possible that you might turn from downwind directly toward the final with only a very short base leg. Okay. So the key idea is to always stay ahead of the airplane and develop the habit of thinking about wind and pattern geometry in advance, rather than simply flying in the same pattern every time. Okay. Great. Now we are in the final. As you turn onto the final, okay, and maintain the same general power setting. For example, around 1500 RPM, and extend the full flaps and adjust your descent pitch attitude to slow the airplane to approximately 65 knots. Because the flaps are fully extended, and the airplane will naturally pitch slightly lower during the descent. which is the lowest one, actually. And at this stage, maintaining alignment with the runways in a line, align with the runways in a line, becomes very important. Up to this point, we were mainly flying the track pattern, but now we are transitioning into landing phase, so precise alignment with the runway is critical. If there's wind, apply the appropriate wind correction so the airplane does not drift away from the center line. Well, at this point in the approach, your primary focus should be outside in the cockpit. You will probably spend more time looking outside here than anywhere else in the pattern. So inside the cockpit, you mainly want to confirm that your airspeed remains just close to 65 knots, and outside your main task is to keep your number one reference point aligned with the touchdown zone marking, which is this one. So set it like this. This one is the number reference point, and this one the touchdown zone marking on the runway. Yeah. This is slightly different from the reference we used earlier on the downwind leg. On downwind, when we talked about a beam point, we were referencing the aim point area near the 1,000-foot marker, which is generally where we plan to land. However, on final, the visual reference we keep match it with our number reference point is the touchdown zone marking, and this one is touchdown zone marking, and this one is the point where we touch down. Okay, so don't misunderstand it. So well, easy way to think about it is this. So we plan to land near 1,000-foot marker, but on final we keep our outside picture aligned with the touchdown zone marking before it, like 500 feet before, or just if there's no touchdown zone marking on your runway, just I think I had like a half point of the point where you touch down. Okay, so set it on your reference point. Okay, number of reference. Okay, cool. And yeah, just after that, your job is just to keep the outside pitch picture stable during the short final. A helpful concept to remember here is pitch controls airspeed and power controls glide path. Okay. If the airplane becomes too slow or too fast, adjust the pitch. And if the airplane becomes too high or too low relative to your desired path, adjust power. Okay, cool. And once your airspeed is stabilized at 65 knots, your trim is properly set, and your outside reference is aligned with your number reference point, the task becomes maintaining that picture. Okay, cool. And if the airplane begins drifting left or right due to wind, use small aileron correction. And sorry, to control the just drift and maintain your ground track. And at the same time, use rudder inputs to keep the nose aligned. With the runway center line. Okay, cool. A simple way to think about is it's use aileron to control drift and rudder to keep the nose aligned with the runway. Does it make sense? Cool. And continue making small corrections in pitch, power, and wind correction so that the same outside picture stays stable all the way down final. These are very important. Yeah, does it make sense? Cool. Now we're ready to land. Before landing, it's important to confirm that the approach is stable. A simple way many instructors teach this is to quickly check a few key conditions on short final. So, correct airspeed, correct configuration, which is full flaps, proper alignment and flight path toward the runway, the airport environment clearly in sight. Because landing is a feature maneuver, maintaining a clear view of the runway environment is essential, right? Anyway, well, if these conditions look good, it's a good habit to make a quick call out such as a stable landing. And this confirms that the airplane is properly set up for a safe landing. And the exact landing technique can vary depending on the airplane, weather conditions, and training style. So always follow the procedures recommended by your instructor and aircraft. For the Cessna 172, a common technique is to continue descending on final until the runway begins disappear under cowling. Under the cowling, if the runway disappears, at the point begin reducing power, and as the airplane gets closer to the runway, when it almost feels like the airplane is about to touch the runway, start raising the pitch slightly to transition into nearly level attitude just above the runway. This phase is called round out, and during the round out, keep your eyes outside because you need to judge the airplane's height above the runway and the timing of the descent. As the airplane begins to lose energy during the round out, it will start to sink slowly toward the runway. At the point, gradually increase the pitch to hold at VY like this. You can think of this as smoothly bringing the nose towards slightly nose high landing attitude, while adjusting your control input based on how quickly the airplane is sinking. For example, if the airplane begins sinking faster, you may raise the pitch a little more quickly to VY. If the sink rate is slower, the pitch change can be slower to VY. In other words, the control inputs are always adjusted dynamically based on what the airplane is doing. Okay, so if this is done smoothly, the airplane will eventually settle onto the runway. Okay. And during the flare, the airplane can easily begin to drift, yaw, or become side-loaded, especially if there's wind. So to prevent this, use proper rudder inputs to keep the airplane aligned with the runway center line. Well, landing, actually more than almost any other maneuver, depends heavily on maintaining the correct outside feature picture. Also, during the flare, looking only straight ahead can sometimes make it harder, right? Harder to notice whether the airplane is become side-loaded or not, right? So in some cases, briefly just referencing the side of the cowling or using your peripheral vision can help you judge alignment and drift relative to the runway. Cool. And remember, just good landing is usually just the result of a stable approach and smooth flare. Okay. Awesome. Cool. All right. So today's lesson was a little longer than usual. And normally when you do a ground lesson with your instructor, the track pattern is often explained much more quickly. Usually by just drawing the pattern and briefly explaining what to do and each staging. Most of the detailed explanations actually happen while you're flying. However, I wanted to go a little deeper in this lesson because I think it can be very helpful to understand these details before you get into the airplane. So if this felt a little long or detailed, I appreciate your patience, but these are important concepts and I believe understanding them ahead of time will make your training much smoother and easier. And in the next video, we'll take everything we discussed today and demonstrate it in X-Plane. We'll fly a complete traffic pattern and look at how each leg actually appears from the cockpit. So this will help you connect the concept from this lesson to what you will see during an actual flight. So in the next lesson, we'll go through a full traffic pattern demonstration in Explain. And yeah, all right. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye.